for a Chicano, for me, the writing poetry and what it means is like, we're writing it not just to create these beautiful words and stuff, it's also to rep our history and to talk about, you know, our lives, because like I said, we're not represented in other things. And I don't just mean Chicanos, I mean, there's so many folks that are left out of it, you know?
That was Josiah Luis Alderete, a poet born and raised in the Mission. I'm your host, Jeff Hunt. Welcome to Storied San Francisco, a weekly podcast where San Franciscans from all walks of life share their stories, and you get to know your neighbors. Just a quick reminder, and apologies if this is preaching to the choir, but you guys, we're still very much in a pandemic. We just want to encourage you to keep staying at home as much as you can. And if you do need to go out, wear a mask, practice distancing from other people, and wash your hands when you get home. This resurgence of COVID-19 didn't have to happen, and we all need to be doing everything we can to ensure that we keep it under control. Okay, in this podcast, Josiah describes his childhood in the city and Marin County. He talks about moving back to San Francisco as a young adult and discovering poetry, mainly at Cafe Babar in the Mission. He met many inspiring poets at Babar, and some of them went on to form a poetry touring group called Molotov Mouths, which Josiah will talk about more in part 2 on Thursday. Here's Josiah.
I was conceived in an apartment above El Sinaloa nightclub, which for a lot of San Franciscos don't know, I am from the Mission. But one of the original Mexican neighborhoods in San Francisco was actually in North Beach, a neighborhood called Little Mexico. Yeah, and my ma came over from Reynosa, Tamaulipas, to work in this club called El Sinaloa, because my tia Lucha, who was actually a norteña singer from Mexico called La Norteñita, she got a gig working at this nightclub over there. It was right off of Broadway. It was Broadway and Vallejo, I think, is the address. And so she got my mom to come over, and my dad was a very suave waiter at the restaurant. So, you know, apparently in no time at all, they charmed each other. And I'm making the jump that I was conceived in that apartment upstairs, but my tia and my ma live there. So, you know, whatever, which is peculiar to me because, you know, I'm also a City Lights book slinger at City Lights Books, which is about 2 blocks away from that apartment building. So in a lot of ways, I feel like I've come all the way home, you know. It's weird. Yeah, man. Yeah, it's a trip. So that's my early stages, you know, the early stages. I was born. I think, you know, apparently it was a smooth birth. I was baffled because on my birth certificate, my father put his occupation as a captain, which I don't understand because he was a waiter, but I don't know what he was thinking. But yeah, you know, born and bred, spread throughout the área Bahia, grew up in the Mission. Well, that was a couple different spots. We lived on 24th for a few years. My mom and dad sort of started getting in that love-hate relationship at that point. So there was a lot of like breakups and get back togethers. So we basically were living up on 24th, almost near 24th and Bryant. My earliest memory also, my mom, I think, had this apartment on Mission, very near where the old donut shop on 24th used to be, the Hunt's Donuts. So we were over there, across the street from there, up above. Yeah, no, that place was iconic. I mean, seriously, it really was. There was, yeah. I mean, a lot of Roberto Lovato, who's an amazing reporter, journalist, and he's actually coming out with a memoir about his life in the Mission, also coming from El Salvador. He talks about Hunt's Donuts all the time. His pops used to hold court there, you know. And there's also the place where you get a lot of stolen goods and you get your dope at. So they had donuts in the front, the stolen TVs and shit in the back. And yeah, man, that place is iconic. But that was kind of my stretch around 24th. And then my mom, you know, moved us to that apartment over there by Hunt's. And there's a couple of places in between, you know. But then the funny thing is, in my 20s, I ended up moving back there. I mean, we moved out of the mission. My mother opened up a Mexican restaurant, which is still open. And she opened it up in the whitest part of that Bay Area, called Marin County. So, oh man, that's probably close. It's probably close, but yeah, man, she opened that there. So probably 13 or 14. That's kind of when she opened up. So I had a whole exposure to like a different part of the Bay. There was an interesting, I don't know, contrast, because every morning I'd go to work with her, and we cross the bridge, and go to a different part of the Bay that was not known to me. So it was an interesting part of growing up, and I worked in the kitchen with her and helped her and got to know Marin that way. And eventually she remarried. And when I was 13 or 14, we moved over to Novato for a few years, which was even more of a kind of an immersion for me. And then when I turned 20, I moved back to San Francisco and lived up on 20th and Bryant, and then on 19th and Valencia, across from the really, really ugly Carlos Santana mural. I don't even know if it's there anymore, but there was an ugly Carlos Santana mural at one point over there. Oh yeah. Well, my earliest memory of the mission, or my earliest, yeah. Well, no, the funny thing is that I have both of them, the early mission memories are both looking out these windows. So there was where we lived on 24th and Bryant. I remember looking out the window and just seeing 24th Street back then. And my mom was real protective, so I wasn't allowed out a lot. So it was kind of like this, divine view that I had of the street, of 24th Street, where I just, all the activity and everything, and being really fascinated by it, and I mean, for good reason. Like 24th Street is, we call it the Pueblo, the poets and the artists from the mission. And it is, it's like our little epicenter, like so, even back then it was, I mean, the Galleria was already there, and there was still so much activity. So yeah, man, it was a very special early memory of the mission. And then same thing with the apartment above. I'm trying to think if it was above Discolandia or so, because there used to be like a record store across from Hunt's Donuts, but that was the view for, I remember as a kid looking down on Mission Street, and that was a little bit of a different view. It wasn't as, it's still, that one kind of gave me a little pause, like, what's some of those folks doing over on the corner? Like, wait a minute, hold up, it wasn't as sweet as 24th, but it was still sweet. Yeah, and then well, pretty set. I mean, I was like 7 or 8. I think that those memories, I was probably 7 or 8, like maybe even a little earlier. You know. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Not really, because no, I mean, the Dia de los Muertos processions memories are mostly in my 20s. Going down to 24th before Renee, because they had the big split for. Yeah, it got kind of weird, because Rene Yanis, one of the founders of the Galleria, he went through an issue with the Dia de los Muertos, where the procession, they actually started it, and then there was kind of like a rupture where they sort of did two of them. So that was I'm trying to remember date wise with that, but I can't. Yeah, yeah. My earliest Dia de los Muertos memory was definitely was like 20s and 30s. Um, Yeah, well, it was definitely to get the hell out of Marin, because my mom remarried for, it was been like 3 years, and I was like, oh gee, it was that, and then just missing that neighborhood. I mean, it's like it's a tough Jones, man. We moved basically from La Misión to like a suburb in Marin, and I get it because my mom, the remarrying thing and all that, but it was tough. So I wanted to get back as soon as possible. And then, and not to talk too shittily about Marin County, but because I went there every day anyway, because I would go work with my mom. So every day we cross the bridge. So I figure, I'm still going over there. I don't have to live there, but, moving in the and also, this part in my life that had a huge influence on me, and in a lot of ways on my return to the mission, was I think it was 88 or 89. Me and my friends found a place called Cafe Babar in the mission, which was on Guerrero and 23rd, something like that. It was a cafe, and that was where I first saw poetry the way it was supposed to be done. You know what I'm saying? It was like it was a Thursday night reading. Well, they did these readings every Thursday night at Cafe Babar, and Babar was like this cafe, had a cafe in the front and this really long hallway that led to this tiny room in the back. And in the back room, there was a little room with some bleachers and one or two tables, and then a wall that had some corrugated metal against it. And that's where they had the readings. And this place, man, it was like where I saw the mission, the mission has always had, I mean, I know North Beach gets that rep for being the literary heart of the mission, but honestly, bro, that's bullshit. I mean, the literary heart of San Francisco, what the North Beach had the influx of the beats and whatnot, but the mission has had like that literary essence from the beginning, and not even just like in the 80s with that sort of like the poets coming in from Nicaragua and Salvador and hanging out at Cafe Bohem, and Alejandro Murgia and all that. I mean, that the mission has been like deep with the cultura. I mean, Oscar Zeta Costa was up on Valencia writing, autobiography of Brown Buffalo and Revolt of the Cockroach People. And Valencia Street had like 6 bookstores at one time, so, it was that place. So Babar was very essential because that's where a lot of these poets, they actually call themselves barbarians. But there was this beautiful mix of poets that were like, Black, Chicano, white, weirdos, hippies, militants. It was like Bucky Sinister was there, Julia Vinograd, David Lerner, Juan Felipe Herrera would stop by, the great poet Q.R. Hand, who's still with us, Alfonso Textador, Jack Michelin, Julia Vinograd, en paz descanse, Julia. So we went there one night, and I found this book at City Lights by Bruce Isaacson, and it said, Bruce reads at this cafe every Thursday night. We're like, fuck it, we'll go there. And I was just blown away, man. These folks were, because when you go to school, you go to these schools and you get almost discouraged from poetry. You almost got to relearn it, when you go out there. And these folks were just speaking it, and they were talking about the neighborhood and, the real shit. And I left that place, man, just like floored. And it was a big part of like, all of a sudden there was this other beacon in the mission that I needed to get to and needed to be around. So that was a big part of me moving back. And, it's funny because Babar, I don't know where the hell this giant sack of peanuts would always come from, but it would be there in that room every Thursday night. And the deal was the poet would go up to read. And if you didn't like the poet's shit, you start throwing peanuts against the corrugated metal wall. Like you give them a couple minutes and then, which is not the norm these days in these very supportive poetry events where everyone's like, no matter what, forget your poem. Yeah, it's okay. And I love that shit. I think it's beautiful. But yeah, this was like a trial by fire, So I remember, it took me like a month and a half to get the Huevos to go up there. But then when I finally did, man, I remember right before I went up, I asked this one beautiful poet, man. It's the first queer poet I ever heard read, named David West. This is a beautiful man. I think he's still alive in the city. He wrote Evil Secretaries and Other Stories, I think it was his first book of poems. But I loved hearing him read, man. He would just tell these wonderful, beautiful stories. And right before I went over this, I was supposed to get up and read. I went over to him, I said, because in a lot of ways, he was like the nicest guy there. He was like everybody else kind of scared the hell out of me. I said, David, I want you to tell me what you think, So he said, okay. And I went up there and I was so scared, man. And at one point, I just glanced over at David and I saw him and his arms are crossed and he was smiling and with his eyes closed, he was going like this, and I was like, oh man, I'm all right then. Okay, I'm all right. And no one's going to throw peanuts at me. So for me, man, it was a literal peanut gallery. It was. Yeah. I was, you know, I sort of, it was the one thing that I'd sort of always kept with me because I wrote, I just never knew they were poems. You know, when I was really young, I started writing, you know, when I finish the shift between dinner and lunch at my mom's place, I would get tips. And I ended up walking up on 4th Street in San Rafael back in the day. There was also the street that had amazing bookstores. There was like Cottage Bookshop, 3 or 4 other bookstores, and there was this newsstand called Rafael Book and News that was open from 6 in the morning to 11 at night. And it was an old school East Coast kind of newsstand, like right in the middle of 4th Street. So they had like comic books in the back, like pulp sci-fi novels, like other romance paperbacks, you know, and then in the front, right behind the registers, like the most filthiest, dirtiest porn you could ever see, everything, you know. So I would go there and start poking around, and I discovered, you know, literature of a sorts there, and so I always had books and writing around me. Yeah, but the poetry, man, it was always there. Yeah. No, no. For me, like I said, I mean, and I know it's probably changed a lot now. You know, but I think a lot of that stuff of the poetry that you learn in school, it's like you almost have to unlearn to enjoy it. Because like I'm a Chicano, bro. I didn't see any brown poets in school. I saw some fucking Western canon shit that's supposed to like straighten us out and keep us flying right and stuff. You know what I mean? It's like a deterrent. So there was nothing there for me. I was like, what the fuck is this? You know? So I had to read Jimmy Santiago Baca the first time, you know, to really go like, but when you, there's nothing more powerful, man, than seeing yourself reflected in literature, seeing yourself, your cultura, who you are, you know, I'm not just talking the skin tone. I'm talking like, you know, when you see that, that's profound. And that, so when I had that happen to me, you know, it was like, so, and I never took, I mean, nowadays, when I see the professors that are out there, like Professor Barbara Jane Reyes, you know, amazing Filipinx teacher poet, or Ben Sierra in San Francisco, you know, Chicano old school poet, wrote the Alex Nieto story, you know, I would be proud and I would love to take classes with them. But back then, maybe I was too lazy or something, but they just weren't around. I didn't see them. So I had to unlearn all that stuff. And no, I never took poetry classes. Honestly, my poetry teachings was at the bar. That was my first lesson, you know, my real first lesson. Yeah, because that was what really shook me is, you know, like I remember Alfonso Textador, you know, reading a poem about 24th Street, you know, at Babar, a person going like me going, wait a minute, you just wrote a poem about this street that I love, that like it's part of my life. It's like oh my God, you know. So yeah, it was profound. It was a profound effect. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, and I wouldn't even call it a reading. It was me reading one poem, you know. So yeah, yeah. But that was my first time, which is kind of a big thing, I get. And I had never thought about that, but it was because we didn't, you know, yeah, it was just straight in there, you know. And that was and that ended up connecting me with like there used to be a bar called the Paradise Lounge south the market, an amazing bar with like all these different floors and levels, and but they would do poetry readings there that were run by Jen Joseph, who's the editor of Nomadic Press. It's this amazing press in the city, who's responsible for publishing so many Bay Area writers and San Francisco writers. And but she ran that press, and then she saw me reading at the bar one night, and because I went back, I would go back afterwards and periodically get enough nerve to read another poem. She asked me to read there, and that was where I ended up meeting a lot of the kind of my poetry comrades from the early '90s. People that we ended up forming a group called Molotov Mouths and going all over the U.S. like reading poetry in the city and stuff. But yeah, but that the Babar was like my first reading. Oh, Oh God. Yeah. No, and then you're done and you're like, it's like, yeah. Oh yeah. No, without a doubt, man. I mean, without a doubt. Yeah, that was I mean, but in that way, I don't know. It's like for a Chicano, for me, the writing poetry and what it means is like we're writing it not just to create these beautiful words and stuff. It's also to rep our history and to talk about our lives, because like I said, we're not represented in other things. And I don't just mean Chicanos. I mean, there's so many folks that are left out of it. But for me, so like the writing, it meant a lot of other things. And I knew even back then, like I said, like I'm be a poet, but it's not like I know I'm not going to get rich off of this shit, or I'm not going to. It's not a thing I'm doing to make money, or obviously because you're not going to make money, but there was a lot of other reasons that I knew even at that early age why I was writing, and a lot of that had to do with some of those folks and what I saw them writing for the first time. So, because yeah, man, it's like the role of the poet it's a very, there's layers to it. I mean, if it wasn't for poets, for me, I wouldn't know half of my history. They're the ones who told it to me, not the academics or so I also knew that if I was going to call myself a poet, I better live up to that shit in that way. So yeah, yeah. Well, it was interesting early on. I think it was mostly like the clica was mostly writers and artists. We would come across folks that had other disciplines, and I knew about other folks. Who influenced me a lot. I specifically think of like Guillermo Gomez Peña. He's he's a calls himself a border artist sometimes, but he's like he's been in the city for years, but he was part of he has a group called La Pocha Nostra. He's also known as the McSterminator. He's just this amazing performance artist, like I don't know what you call him, poetic terrorist, man, but he was around early back then. And so I always followed him and admired him a lot. And I think some of the performative aspects of what he does sort of came across and influenced me a lot. So I never had, years later, I actually ended up taking a workshop with him at Fort Mason, which was a big deal and big fanboy moment for me. But back then I didn't know him. There were the folks like him, and there were other folks that I admired, but I didn't really interact with. They were more like influences. Also like the muralists, back like Enrique Chayoga, like folks like that, like a lot of folks at the Galeria de Raza. So it was people that those different artistic elements were there, and they were like interacting with me, but I didn't interact so much with the artists or more than just the creations. Yeah. Well, the amazing thing about that is, man, like the mission. Okay, Valencia Street back then, man. I mean, you start with 16th Street, and from 16th Street to 24th, there was like appliance shops and an occasional peculiar store. There was Leather Tongue Video, which was an amazing weird video store. But on Valencia, between 16th and 24th, there was like 5 bookstores. There was the Green something on 16th. There was the original Adobe Books was on 16th. There was Abandoned Planet, which was like right two down from a check cashing place. Kept going. There was the original gigantic Modern Times bookstore, which was right across the street from where Dog Eared Books is now. That giant, like it's like a Art Deco like furniture rental thing. That was one big, beautiful bookstore, man. And across from there was that? Yes, yes. And then right across from where Dog Eared is now, there was the only Spanish language bookstore in the Mission called Casa de Libros. That was there too. And then all the way down was the where Dog Eared Books used to be. And then there was Mission Comics farther down. So these places all at one time or another would host readings. And the Chameleon Bar, which was in the parking lot right across the street from where Modern Times used to be. And Bucky Sinister would host these punk rock readings there that were just insane and amazing. Bucky had a huge influence on me in the beginning, man. He's a sweetheart, and just, man, him leaving San Francisco was hard, bro. Because for me, there's some poets and artists that rep the city so hard that when they leave, you're like, man, you just took a piece of this place with you. And you're him in the early '90s, and in the poetry scene, there was nobody else like him, because he was one of them cats that could go from the different cliques, the different poetry cliques, and everyone loved him. Like at Babar, like some of them, I may have given the impression that some of these people were a little intimidating, and they were, but like for some reason they all loved Bucky, and he was like half their age. So like he was just this, like they just loved him, and God, he's such a sweetheart.
That was Josiah Luis Alderete. On the next episode of Storied San Francisco, Josiah will tell us more about Molotov Mouths, and he'll read some of his poetry. Part 2 drops this Thursday, so don't miss it. I want to thank Cassandra Dallett for introducing us to Josiah. Cassandra was our guest back in episode 1 this season. Music for Storied San Francisco is by Otis McDonald. Photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. The show is hosted and produced by me. Michelle and I have produced more than 120 episodes over the last 3 years, and you can find them all over at our website, storiedsf.com. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, as well as just about everywhere you can listen to podcasts. Please subscribe to stay up to date on all the content we publish. And if you have any feedback for us, or you just want to say hi, our email is storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay strong, stay safe, and stay healthy.